I thought I'll just share with you some reflections that I have been having over the past maybe 12, 14 days. I was asked to do the devotion at the Missions Interlink AGM, and that was what started this whole reflection. What was God wanting me to share at the AGM? But more important, what was God wanting to say to me and my own life as a witness, as a missions practitioner in the world that he has placed me in. And as I was reflecting a lot about what this means, it got me thinking quite a bit about things that are precious to me, my rights, my uh, desires, my passion, things that I really hold as dear to me. And the challenge was, am I willing to lay that aside for the sake of the gospel? And as I was reflecting on this, my mind went to Paul and what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 9. And two verses that struck me was found in 1 Corinthians 9 verses 22 to 23, where Paul says, I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in his blessings. This passage from Paul, I guess, is familiar to us, or we have probably read it many times, we have heard it preached, we have reflected on it, and we often read it as a model of cultural adaptability. And probably Paul was also sharing that as the fact that he was culturally adept in fitting into the different situations that he is in. But how did he get to that place of being culturally adaptable? And if you were to look at the context of this passage, and if you were to read 1 Corinthians 8 to chapter 8 to chapter 10, you would find that Paul keeps talking about rights. But more important, as he talked about his rights, he talks about how he is surrendering those rights one at a time, placing them at the foot of the cross, surrendering it to Jesus Christ in order that he can be truly adaptable in reaching people who are so different from us. Paul, in some ways, recognized that our insistence of holding on to our rights, even our rights as a follower of Christ, our rights as a Christian, it becomes so precious to us that it sometimes can stand in the way of us being sensitive to the people around us and bringing the gospel to those people. And so this got me thinking quite a bit. Why would Paul do that? Why would Paul be willing to surrender his rights? It's not because he is weak or not because he is desperate for approval, but I believe because the gospel has reshaped his identity, who he is. The gospel was molding him to be more and more Christ-like, which which often led him to a place where he had to surrender his rights in order to be more like Christ, the kind of person Christ was, as Paul would say in Philippians 2, where he had all his rights as God, but he laid it all aside and came as a servant, obedient to the will of the Father, willing to even die on the cross in order that he can reach the world and reconcile the world to his Father. And so to be more and more Christ-like, Paul recognized that one by one, the rights that he holds as precious to him, he lays it at the foot of the cross. He surrenders those rights in order to be more Christ-like and to be able to reach out to the different people that is around him. Gordon Fee calls this a cruciform identity, a life that is shaped by the cross. And Michael Gorman describes cruciformity as a way of being in the world marked by self-emptying love, humility, and presence. Paul isn't just adapting to culture. He is entering people's worlds like Jesus entering into our world, where he had to give up his rights in order that he can enter people's worlds without trying to control them or force them to be like him. Paul, in some ways, wasn't erasing his identity. He was enlarging it for the sake of the gospel. Andrew Walls reminds us mission always carries two movements: the indigenizing impulse, where the gospel is rooted in every culture, and the pilgrim impulse, where the gospel challenges every culture. And Paul stands right there in that tension. He doesn't pull people into his world, he steps into theirs, trusting that Christ is already there before him. A missionary once described her first visit to a remote village. She entered the village, she came to the village with training, resources, strategies, ready to serve the people in that village. Yet a local elder greeted her with these words. He said to her, "You are welcome here, but first sit with us long enough for us to forget that you are a visitor." She realized something, that as she sat and listened, mission didn't begin when she arrived. Mission had already begun because she could see that God was already there at work. Her task wasn't to bring Christ into that village, but to recognize that Christ is at work in their midst. And her task was to listen, to learn, and then to join what Christ was already doing. This moment didn't really weaken her ministry, it deepened it. It helped her become more Christ-like in coming to be a servant rather than coming to be the Lord and to dictate to them what they should believe. She moved, if you like, from being a mission planner or a mission strategist to becoming a cruciform guest. When I was at Bible College in Australia, we had a whole list of books that we had to read, mission stories, mission resources and ideas to help fill our understanding of what mission would look like and how we can be involved in missions. And one of the books that we read was a book written by Don Richardson called The Peace Child. Many of you may have heard of this book or have read the book. And in this book, Don Richardson shares a story of his mission to the Savi people of Papua New Guinea, a tribe that actually valued treachery. They honored clever betrayal. And so when he preached about Judas and Jesus, guess who was the hero of the story? It was Judas, not Jesus. Jesus was the villain in when he shared the story to that tribe. And so for months, Don Richardson just felt hopeless and just wondering, how is he going to bring the gospel to this tribe. And as he was sort of praying and as he was listening and observing, he suddenly discovered a culture of practice of these tribes. And this practice is that when two warring tribes want to seek true peace, one tribe would give an infant, a peace child, to the other tribe. And as long as that child lived, peace would remain. Richardson suddenly saw what God had already planted in that culture, a bridge, a pointer, a whisper of the gospel. He explained that Jesus is God's peace child, given not to end a tribal war, but to reconcile the world to himself. And as long as Jesus lives, the peace of God, the peace that God gives, the reconciliation of the relationship will last for as long as Jesus lives. And you and I know that Jesus lives for all eternity. And so this peace that God gives when we are reconciled with him, the peace that comes from God, is there for all eternity. And at last, Richardson could see how he could bring the gospel in a way that was meaningful to these tribes through their own culture. The Savi people didn't receive a new religion. They recognized the fulfillment of something God had already woven into their story. Christ was not brought to them, Christ was revealed among them. Perhaps this is our invitation today, something that we need to reflect on, and something that I have been reflecting on. It's not so much about designing strategy or being vocal in what we want to see change in our society, but more to embody a posture. There's nothing wrong with strategy. There's nothing wrong with being vocal and standing up against the evils and injustices that are in the world. But how do we come to develop strategies, or to be vocal, or to bring the gospel to people who need to hear the gospel? It has to come from a posture, something that is embodied deep within ourselves, to lead with presence, to listen as guests, to lay down the rights we hold tightly, not to be less missional, but to become more Christ-like. Sometimes our insistence of our rights, even as believers, can stand in the way of us being Christ-like, of us being able to enter into a world that is so different from us, in order that we can see God at work, and revealing the God at work in the different cultures and ethnicities that we come across. And so there was something that led me to take time out to look at my own heart, and to say, have I embraced this cruciform identity? Have I given up the rights that I so want to hold on to, in order that I can be more like Christ, who gave up his rights in order to bring the message of reconciliation to the world? And so the question that got me thinking is this: where is God calling me, and I guess calling you, to lay something down, something in our life, our rights that we hold dear to us, the pleasures that we enjoy, the our own hopes and dreams? Where is God calling us to lay those things down, so that the beauty of the gospel can be seen more clearly? And I had to take time out to reflect on this, and I hope that this is something that you too can reflect on, as we look at being ambassadors of the kingdom, someone who has been entrusted with the ministry of reconciliation and the message of reconciliation, to follow the path that Jesus took, to be like him, where we lay down all our rights in order to come and be a servant, which means even sacrificing all our dreams and ambitions, our hopes, and on the cross, and saying, God, use me in order that I can listen and I can see where you are at work, so that I can bring the gospel in a way that would be relevant to them, to reveal the gospel that you have already planted within the cultures that are around us. Help me and help us, I guess, to be like Christ in the situations that we come across, so that we can truly be the the channels of God's grace in the world around us. To be like Paul, who could say, I become all things to all people in order that I can reach some. Lord, make me a person that embraces the cruciform identity. And I pray that you too would have this dream and this desire as well. Bless you, my friends, and praying that your journey would be like mine, wanting to be more and more like Christ. Bless you heaps.